over a couple of things that we mentioned last week. Just in terms of Zoom, I'm getting to know it myself. I'm not too familiar with it. So it looks like one thing we did last week was, at least during the meditations, I have the, there's a button here where I can just mute all of, well, not me, but everyone else, just so that as particularly during the meditation, we can all, then if the phone goes off or the dog starts talking on the phone or something, then it doesn't disturb the rest of us. So, but then each of us has the ability to unmute if there's any questions or comments. And last week we didn't have a whole lot of, there wasn't so much discussion, but maybe as we get more familiar with being on Zoom, the material that we're starting out with and going to be working with for a few weeks really lends itself to discussions. So I'm hoping that this format we can all have some confidence to kind of dive in to some of the discussion. That would be wonderful. The other thing that we talked about last week was what we've been doing in the class. So where we meet, we started to record the class so that we could then post it on the website, and folks that missed it or wanted to listen again could listen to that. So we got an option here to record this as well. And having talked about it last week, I then forgot to press the record button. So last week didn't happen, but I'm hoping if I mention it again, I might remind myself to do it. So, but I wanted to let folks know, if that's okay, we'll go ahead and record. And if you're not comfortable being recorded for the video, you can just turn the video off, and then hopefully that still encourages lots of discussion. I think the discussions that we've had in previous classes have been very rich, and each of us brings wisdom to the groups that would be really worthwhile, really valuable for all of us to benefit from. So hopefully we can kind of see that as maybe as some generosity with each other. There's an option where Sue wrote something, and for questions in the chat. And there's also, I think there's a way that you can kind of raise your hand, like click something and it kind of raises the hand. There's another option as well. So if that's okay, so I'm gonna actually go ahead and click record now so we can, okay. So that's now recording. And I wanted to thank Pam Tingpa again for hosting this, for inviting inviting us all really to have the opportunity to meet and to find a way to do this, even though we're not able to meet in person. So thank you all very much, and then equally thank you to everyone for joining and for the opportunity for us to connect and to meditate a little bit together, and to then introduce some ideas and hopefully to hear from each other, and gain some experience from each other's point of views. So last week we focused, as a kind of central element, we focused on mindfulness, and particularly kind of in terms of how we can use different ways of introducing and integrating mindfulness into our lives, to particularly to help us as we self-isolate and distance ourselves from each other's physically, how we can nevertheless maintain good mental and emotional well-being through our meditation practice, and through different ideas that we explored last week in terms of how we can work with the distracted mind, the mind that kind of doesn't want to be present and kind of tends away from a mindful, open, loving presence. We talked particularly about how to kind of responding to current events with compassion and wisdom, and also how to use current events, use the ever-changing circumstances that we're experiencing to develop compassion and wisdom. And so I thought, I was thinking, how can we move deeper into how do we actually develop those qualities, compassion and wisdom? How do we kind of dive into them and explore and investigate in ways that are practical and accessible? Um, I thought to introduce this course, the Building Inner Strengths course, and it's a set of 16 guidelines that are designed for us to reflect on the ways that we think, the ways that we act, and the ways that we speak. Um, Actually, the origin of them was uh, a 7th century Tibetan king who invited philosophical and spiritual leaders of that time to Tibet. Tibet at that time, we often perhaps think of Tibetans and Tibet as a compassionate, kind of quite peaceful, positive community culture. In 7th century Tibet, it was quite divided, quite a lot of kind of warring factions. So this king, with his wisdom, introduced philosophical and spiritual leaders, and then these 16 guidelines are actually kind of drawn out. The idea being a very accessible, practical set of values and principles that were introduced. And during his time, there was quite a massive transformation to a much more peaceful society. So this is a contemporary presentation of those guidelines, and it's been several years in the making. But what we have is kind of a contemporary presentation of an ancient wisdom. But as we see increasingly with mindfulness and other forms of meditation, there's a lot that modern science is very interested in conversations with the kind of more ancient meditation traditions. Turns out the mind is the same, the heart is the same, the qualities that we aspire to are the same, the characteristics, the tendencies, the habits that we would like to move away from that cause us suffering are the same. So there's been very interesting conversations in the last 20 years, particularly, between these ancient traditions and modern science. So this 16 guidelines really integrates like modern science, Western and Eastern philosophy, Western and Eastern psychology, meditation traditions, and into kind of what we could call a mind or heart science. And that's what we'll be exploring. There's a simplicity to these guidelines. And yet at the same time, what we'll find as we explore them, they pervade really all philosophical, spiritual, and religious traditions in the world. So we have the material that we're going to be looking at is with the 16 different guidelines, and it's divided into 4 different wisdom themes. And those 4 are the way that we think. It's the first theme, exploring the way that we think. The basis of everything that we say or do is coming from the way that we're viewing the world, the way that we're interpreting events, and the way that we're thinking about ourselves and the world around us. It's the very basis of everything that we say or do. So that's the first wisdom theme. Then the second one is the way that we act. So recognizing that every skillful action that we engage in makes the world a better place. Even the smallest of skillful actions. So better for ourselves and better for others. So there's four guidelines for each of the wisdoms. So there's be 4 guidelines that we'll explore in terms of how we act. And the next wisdom theme that we'll explore is the ways that we relate to others, really based on the kind of central theme that the way that we, every time that we cherish others, every time that we find ways to be interested and take care of others, the benefit that we're able to offer. And also what we recognize and we see increasingly is the benefit for ourselves by engaging in that way. And then the last of the wisdom themes is ways that we find meaning. So kind of an ability to explore, our ability to explore new and unfamiliar territory, or familiar territory in new ways. So the outline for our sessions for the coming weeks is we'll continue on developing, diving into our mindfulness practice, our meditation practice, and we'll begin each week with some meditation practice, as we've been doing in previous weeks. And then we'll explore each wisdom theme in turn over the course of 4 weeks, 1 week on each guideline. And as we explore, introduce a guideline each week, we'll look at some of the science and the research, some contemporary ideas around it. There'll be some guided meditation around that. There'll be some reflections, and then what would be wonderful is if we can, really try to engage in some discussions. So we have a little bit more of an experiential session together, certainly than some of the previous classes we've had. So the idea is each week we can dive into one of these guidelines, have a bit of meditation together, reflect a little bit, and then some discussions for relating to the meditations that we've been exploring. So as a starting point, I wonder if anyone has any questions about anything we've covered so far.
Tenzin, I do. Tell me the king's name. Dashi, or what did you?
The king Sonsen Gampo. Songsen Gampo.
So, thank you.
Yeah, I think 7th century. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then some of the history is, I think, probably, this kind of material, this has been, I think, for about 10 years, maybe about 10 years, has been kind of worked to integrate with contemporary science ideas, philosophy, and has been presented in different ways and kind of evolved so that it's really as accessible as possible based on the material. I think as we dive into it, it will hopefully become even clearer the kind of ideas that we're going to be exploring. This week, for the first guideline, we're going to be talking about humility. And so what I'd like to do each week is to start off with some mindfulness meditation. And so,
can I ask a question?
Yeah, Sue.
So it was how you think, how you act. What was the third one?
The ways that we relate to others.
The way we relate to others, and then how we put it into practice.
And then the ways that we find meaning.
The way we find meaning. Okay.
Yeah, ways that we find meaning.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So as we spend a little bit of time meditating together, I'll go ahead and see if I can mute. Yeah, I'll go ahead and mute all of us so that we can have more of a space for the meditation. Okay. So let's go ahead and settle into a meditation posture. So whether we're sitting on a chair or a cushion, wherever we are in the comfort of our homes, or just taking a moment to settle the body, connecting with the sense of support underneath us, the chair or the cushion. Grounded with this support underneath us, connecting with the earth element, the solidity and the support that we can relax into. And keeping the back straight and long, perhaps imagining a thin thread from the crown of the head, pulling the top of the head up slightly towards the ceiling. And then we can place our awareness on the crown of the head, and we're going to scan slowly, journeying down through the body, just checking in, paying attention to how different parts of the body are feeling right now, noticing any areas of tension, any sensations, whether there's comfort or discomfort, just noticing. As we come down into the face, particularly around the eyes and the mouth, letting go of any tension that we're holding. Into the neck and the shoulders. And if we like, perhaps breathing, imagining the breath coming into any areas of tension, and then imagining the breath, on the out breath, any tension, we breathe it out. Down into the upper torso. Just connecting with our body. Into the arms, whether the hands are on the knees or on the lap. Just checking that we're not holding our arms in a tense way. And down into the hips and the legs. All the way down into the tips of the toes. And with the next in-breath, we're going to breathe in and imagine that the breath comes in through the nostrils and down, travels all the way down through the body, down to the tips of the toes. Repeating this a few times. And having settled the body in this way, arriving more fully into our body, and bringing our attention to the mind itself. And just bringing to mind the consideration that for the next few minutes, we can allow ourselves, give ourselves permission to settle our attention fully in the present moment, letting go of anything that we were doing in the past, letting go of anything that we have planned for the future. No matter what thoughts come up, from another time or another place, we can just let them go, confident in this space that we've created to attend as fully as possible to this moment as it continually changes. So having connected with our body, sensations, and bringing our attention into the present, I'm now going to do the 9-round breathing, which can help just let go of any heavy energy or energy that's pulling our minds this way and that. So as we breathe in, we're going to imagine that the breath comes in through the right nostril, down into the belly region. And then as we breathe out, we're imagining the breath coming out just through the left nostril. And we're going to repeat this 3 times. And now we're going to breathe in, imagining the breath comes in through the left nostril. We're going to draw it down into the belly, and then we're going to breathe out, imagining the breath leaves through the right nostril. We're going to repeat this 3 times. And now we're going to breathe in through both nostrils, draw the breath down into the belly, and then breathe out through both nostrils. And we're going to repeat this 3 times. And now we'll let go of this visualization, then allow our attention to settle on the breath in its normal, natural rhythm and rate. And for a few minutes, silently together, we'll hold our attention, invite our attention to notice the sensations associated with the breath as we breathe in and we breathe out, bringing our full being, our full heart's attention to the breath. As we're breathing in, knowing that we're breathing in. And as we're breathing out, knowing that we're breathing out. And as we bring this loving presence to each breath, just noticing that each breath is a reminder of the miracle of being alive. And when we find our mind moving to another place or another time, just noticing that this has happened, and bringing our attention firmly but kindly back to watching our breath. And now that we've settled our mind a little, we can just check in with ourselves, setting our motivation, perhaps asking ourselves why we're here. Why am I here for this session? Is my motivation for myself, or perhaps also for others? Is it for the benefit of a few, or perhaps for many? Is it for now, today, or perhaps also for the future? And then perhaps bringing a focus on a conscious motivation for the session. Perhaps how wonderful it would be if I could become and be more mindful of my actions of body, speech, and mind, in my interactions with others, and in my relationship with myself. And then perhaps we can broaden this motivation to include the welfare of others, that we would perhaps like the time that we spend together, to be meaningful and beneficial, to bring each other, ourselves, and others around us happiness, and for our actions not to be a cause of any unhappiness in the world. And as we focus on this positive motivation, feel it resonating through your body and mind. And then as we bring this meditation to an end, just gently inviting some movement into the body, and perhaps noticing any sounds around as you expand your awareness and attention out into the room that you're in, and then more fully connecting with the group. Okay. Well, I wonder, first of all, if there's any thoughts or experiences, comments, or questions about the meditation that we just did. So, for those that have been joining the group for some time, we've been exploring some of these ideas kind of over the course of several weeks. So as we continue on with these classes, we'll continue to go a bit deeper and introduce a few more elements to the meditations. Okay. So we start with, we mentioned the 4 wisdom themes. And this, as we start out, we're going to explore the first of the wisdom themes, and that is how we think. And within that wisdom theme, we're going to explore the first guideline, which is humility. I thought so we could spend a minute or two, a few minutes, kind of looking at, considering this, these wisdom themes have been drawn out from the material. And as we look at how we think, we recognize that at the root of every word that we speak and every action that we perform is the basis of our concepts, of what we're thinking about the situation, about ourselves, about others, about our interactions. That from in every single moment, we are influenced by, our lives are shaped by our thoughts. So, as we've talked about in other weeks, we've kind of dived into this a little bit in terms of, we've used the example of perhaps of a filter that we're looking through, the filter of all our past experiences that we use as effectively as we can to shape. They've shaped our experience, and the lens through which we then look, the filter that we look through, to try to understand, to make sense of the experience that we have in front of us. We've also talked a little bit about how through the process of gathering information in the world around us, how much of our experience is actually collecting bits of information through our senses and then connecting the dots, our mind working very, very quickly to kind of gather the data, gather the information, and then extrapolate some meaning in an effort to be efficient, given that there's so much information, too much information to take it all in and process. And there, of course, on one hand, there's some efficiency. There's the opportunity to use learning, to use our past experiences to help shape, but there's also room for error, as it were, as we connect the dots and we make assumptions. That therein lies the possibility of relating to our perceptions, to our interpretations, to our conclusions and assumptions, beliefs, rather than to what's really there. So one of the reasons that we continue with the theme of mindfulness throughout these classes is that in an experiential way, the practice of mindfulness gives us the opportunity to endeavor to invite our minds, to encourage our minds to be present, to engage with the experience as it happens, as close, kind of in as natural a way as possible, to become aware of the thoughts and beliefs and interpretations and assumptions that we overlay, and to try to move beyond them, to see through them, to recognize they're there, and to go deeper, to be more fully present. so that we're relating more to what's going on and less to what we think's going on. Nevertheless, what we think's going on is very influential in our experience. And so at the very basis of these 16 guidelines is a recognition of this, the influence and the kind of creative power of the mind in shaping our reality. So it's really the most important theme of all of them, of all of the four, in terms of underlying the ideas, these 16 guidelines, and how we'll work on building inner strength. The more that we can get to know how much and in what ways our thoughts and our mind influences our experience, then we can work with it effectively and grow. So in some ways, we have an instinctive way of relating to the world as being something out there, and it's a very kind of instinctive, ingrained impulse, belief, our way of operating. And yet, when we think about it, that belief really results in a state of vulnerability. That as changing the external changing nature, particularly, we bring to mind our current experience and how much change is possible in such a short time and how rapidly changing. And yet, the more that we tie our experience to what's going on out in the world, the more that there's that kind of sense of vulnerability, that state of vulnerability. So our investigation through this wisdom theme is to look at how our experience is significantly influenced, not just by what's going on out in the world, the shapes, the people, the experiences, the material development and changing, but also how our experience, our state of happiness, our state of mind, our state of our heart is significantly influenced by what's going on inside. And as we're discovering right now, there's often very little that we can do about the external events. There's always something that we can do about the internal. So there's really the kind of invitation for us to dive a bit deeper. The interest, the motivation to have more than a passing interest, to connect with how much we are interested in developing a resilient, kind, patient, loving state of mind and heart, then that much, the degree to which we're interested in those qualities, we can see those qualities of benefit in our own lives and those around us, the more then we get energy, we get kind of juice for the journey to go a bit into our mind and see what we can do to make some adjustments, some changes, to better understand it so we can more fully develop those qualities. Because we see how much our emotional state, the state of our mind and our emotional reactions are kind of driven, created by a complex mixture of experiences, attitudes, and beliefs. So these thoughts, these narratives, these storylines, the lenses that we look through become very interesting for us to look at and explore a bit further. So, we talked about how do we respond with wisdom and compassion to our current events, particularly. This present moment is always the current event. And how do we use our current events, our circumstances and situations to further develop, enhance our compassion, our way of engaging lovingly with others around us and with ourselves, and wisdom to better understand how things exist and how our experience is coming into being. So humility is the first of the guidelines, and there's an opportunity for us to explore a kind of almost like a door in to both compassion and wisdom, as we'll discover, and for us to the kind of the flavor to try to get inside and taste, hopefully this evening, a little bit more and share that about our experience of humility. So we could say humility, one way we could describe it as an attitude of experiencing the world, ourselves and others, the world around us. An attitude of experiencing the world and what it contains with a sense of interest and openness and curiosity. So it's a particular kind of stance with which we turn towards the world with a sense of interest and openness. It's a way that we can connect that feels very open, very loving, interested. Another way we could say it's characterized by an ability to acknowledge kind of accurately one's own limitations and abilities, and in a balanced way, and a kind of position, a way of interacting in the world that's interpersonal, that is turning towards others, so more kind of other oriented and self-focused. So we have these qualities of presence. And this is, you see, we can see how mindfulness really comes into this, and how we can see this humility being a way for us to kind of further taste or explore compassion and love. A stance where we're facing towards the world and others with an openness and an interest and a curiosity, a wanting to get to know, wanting to connect, an interest. So seeing, I think also there's an element of seeing ourselves as part of something much vaster. A recognition, I think there's a tuning in when we explore some of the kind of elements, the ingredients of humility, the tuning into the reality that we are, of how much we're dependent on others for everything. And we can just take a look around the room that we're in right now, and we can pick out any object and think about how many people are involved in the ideas for that to come into being, the design, the materials, the construction, the transportation to wherever it was that we bought it, or we were, it came into our possession, all the people that were involved along the way. Is really mind-blowing when we think of how many beings are involved in just one, for me to be able to enjoy one object. And then we think of all through our lives, like how much we're interconnected and dependent on others. And I think that connection, that tuning into that sense of being interconnected, interdependent, and recognizing that is another ingredient that we have, the quality of humility. So I think that we look at a few different elements here, and we're going to explore this more in a meditation together and some reflection and discussion. I think there's some key pieces that seem to kind of stand out is being able to recognize one's own limitations in a healthy, balanced way, to be able to see beyond one's own viewpoints and interests. So beyond the way that I believe the world to be, or the way that I believe myself or others to be, to recognize that may not be the final truth, to see beyond that, to be open to explore others' viewpoints of interest. I think there's another element of recognizing the interdependence, the interconnected nature, and an openness to learning from others. So there's this basic, with all of this, we see this kind of shift in terms of focus, interest from oneself to others in a healthy, balanced way. And with that, we can see, as we explore a little bit, as we continue to explore this evening, we'll see how there's elements of wisdom, being interested in discovering more clearly how things are, and therefore going beyond any concepts that I have about any kind of conclusions I have about how things are, being willing to explore that, to continue to grow our knowledge and wisdom. And then the compassion of recognizing our relationship with others and being open and interested in connecting, in relating. In terms of the kind of, I thought to, in some of the just brief kind of exploration into some of the Western sciences, the kind of what Western psychology has to offer, the discussion of humility. It's a relative newcomer to Western social and personality psychology. Primarily because Western psychology has been interested up until relatively recently with what we kind of refer to as abnormal psychology, of how do we help, how do we, the study, the interest, and the treatment of dysfunction. And it's only relatively recent with the introduction of positive psychology that there's been more interest and energy and focus into how do we go from kind of normal, as it were, to thriving. And within that context, then humility was there was more focus, more interest. And again, the research kind of strongly links humility to, again, the same qualities of curiosity, reflection, and open-mindedness. Those were the kind of key ingredients that were teased out. And that those who scored high in humility, there were some studies that showed that people tended to be less polarized relating to their views, whether they were political, in some of the studies, political views, less a tendency to hold a political view, but to not be so extreme, not feel so polarized, and also in religious views as well. So what that showed in some of the studies was a less reactivity. So it didn't speak to the confidence or the conviction. In fact, the studies showed that there was often with a sense of humility, there was a strong conviction about one's beliefs, but it was there was and maybe part of that, like actually quite a strong conviction, was a more of a quiet confidence, having thought through, almost like there's a kindness around that confidence. And what was discovered, very interestingly, I think it's also quite relevant perhaps during these difficult times, there was less reactivity when people who scored high on humility, when the views that they believed, when they were challenged, there was less reaction, less, and particularly what they measured was aggression and judgment. So when the views that they had conviction were challenged, they didn't budge so much with they weren't kind of bowled over in terms of their conviction, but there wasn't an aggressive or judgmental reaction. So I think again that we can see that seems to indicate humility has a nice there's a nice opportunity there for us to be able to integrate those different ingredients, isn't it? The confidence to explore and come to conclusions about ideas, and then also, as we find in discussion, in debate, healthy relationships where those views are challenged in any way, just being drawn in less emotionally, less aggressively, less judgment. So another way, last week we talked about, in terms of mindfulness, we talked about two sides of the coin. We've got a mindful state on one hand, and then we've got a kind of automatic pilot, habitual tendencies, the old habits, the kind of the usual story. So I think that can be generally quite a helpful way of looking at each of these guidelines as well. On one side of the coin, we've got humility. So on the other side, we've got perhaps what we could call pride or self-importance. In fact, the Merriam-Webster definition of humility, it was interesting to see, is actually defined in terms of freedom from pride or arrogance. So that's actually the way that it is defined. I think they can, as we discussed last week, coming from both sides, it can help us. How do we get to humility? Well, how do we develop or enhance these qualities, humility? Well, one way is to look at what's holding me back. What's limiting? Where's the resistance to being able to relate to people with a humble manner? And what we find is a sense of pride or arrogance or self-importance. So it can be helpful to what do we mean by that? What does that taste like? What does that feel like? I think what we tend to see is kind of a strongly grasping at a sense of like an inflated or superior image of oneself. So, and what we see then as a kind of blocking barrier, isn't it, between ourselves and others, with that sense of inflation or superior image. And I think what we then see is sort of barrier. It impedes the way that we can relate with others. But I think also what we tend to see is it stunts our learning, our opportunity to learn and grow. There's in some of the meditation tradition, there's a saying, I think it translates more or less as the mountaintop of pride won't get flooded by the water of good qualities. And I think that this, as we explore humility and pride, both sides of the coin, we see that this ability to recognize where we have elements of kind of unhelpful, unskillful inflation of oneself, an exaggerated sense of how important oneself is, the block that has in terms of a relationship, and the way that also blocks our ability to learn, to explore, to grow. That essentially it kind of we see pride causing us to disrespect and look down on others. And then we look at compassion, we see that this, if pride disconnects, causes some disconnection between ourselves and others, then we have a barrier to really being able to put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, to develop empathy. And that there's also kind of a fuel in that pride for discord or divisiveness, disharmony or aggression. So, we might ask ourselves, why do we start? So we've got 16 of these different guidelines and to chat about, and why do we start with humility? Why is this the starting point? And I think one way that we can answer that is that in order to kind of grow and develop, pride really holds a view that in this instance, maybe, or with this person, or in this way, I've got nothing to learn. I know it. I've got it. And then how do we grow and develop if we have that, even in subtle ways, that view of I've got nothing to learn right now. So humility gives us the opportunity to recognize that resistance, to leaning in, to connecting, to opening our minds, to be curious, to be interested, and to encourage us to notice where we're kind of closed, blocked, disconnected. We got it. We're fine. And to be able to open that. So I thought we could, perhaps we can do there's also an opportunity if there's any questions about what we've been discussing so far.
So I wrote it down. So it seems like one would need, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Seems like one would need some self-acceptance in order to be able to have humility, because the pride seems to come from like a disconnection and it's opposite of self-confidence in a way. Because if you have self-confidence, then if you have self-confidence and self-acceptance, then you can be calmer and you could like really listen to people and try and understand them and have humility. Where if you don't, if you're nervous, or I don't know if nervous is the right word, but if you haven't done Anyway, that's my little.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Sue. I think nervous is a great word. I think there's that when we explore, the kind of quiet confidence to be able to turn towards and open and be open-minded. There is a sense of confidence, isn't there? Stable.
Well,
And whereas that nervousness, that kind of insecurity of not being sure, sometimes that can result in us being a bit more closed-minded and not wanting to explore.
but also if you're nervous, sometimes nervous is okay if you allow yourself to be vulnerable. I think like if you go in and you have enough self-confidence to be vulnerable, so if you're nervous, you could say, I'm a little nervous, then like just to allow yourself to be vulnerable is another thing that allows you to have humility, I think, because you're not afraid to be nervous or be whatever you are, but you accept it kind of, and it's okay, like you're accepting yourself.
Yeah, I think those are important qualities. We're going to also spend a little time with a guided meditation on humility, and then some reflection and some discussion questions. So I think there's some ideas there, Sue, that you shared that would be really interesting for us to kind of bring a bit more to life in the discussion. Thank you. So perhaps for about, 5 or 10 minutes, we can do a guided meditation together on see if we can, there's some, blah, blah, blah about humility, and see if we can now settle and kind of go a bit deeper in our own experience. So let's go ahead and settle into a meditation posture again. Bringing our attention to the body, allowing the body to settle. And then bringing our attention to the breath. And as we watch our breath for a few moments, just noticing any activity in the mind, any thoughts coming and going, without doing anything in particular to them. Just noticing and choosing to not engage with whatever arises. So now we're going to move out of our head and into our hearts as we bring to mind, focus on the question of, for us, what is humility? As we focus on this question of what is humility, noticing what arises in our minds, in our hearts. What does it mean to you in this moment? How do you feel when you are humble? What does it feel like in the heart, in the body perhaps? What role does humility have in your life? And how do others react when you are humble? And then bring the attention back to the breath for a minute or so, just focusing on the movement of the breath, breathing in, breathing out. Now we're going to move out of the head again, back into the heart. And as we focus on what it feels like when we have the experience of not being humble, when there's pride or some arrogance or some sense of self-importance, overinflated. Notice what arises in our minds, in our hearts, in our bodies perhaps, when we're in this more prideful state. And how do others react when we're not humble? When we're coming from a place of pride or self-importance? How do others react to that? And then we can consider, how do we think that we could become more humble? How could we invite humility more into our lives? What would change if we became more humble? We're able to relate to ourselves and others in the world around us from a place of more humility. What would change for us? Okay, and then bringing our attention back to the breath and to the sensation of the seat underneath us, and the sounds in the space we're in, and expanding our attention out into the room that we're in, and then reconnecting with the group. Okay. So as we explore what humility is for us, hopefully we get during the meditation we're able to kind of settle in and explore that experience a little bit. And I wonder what does it mean? What were any thoughts or experiences, any insights that came to mind during the meditation?
I don't want to speak again if someone else wants to speak.
Well, what if you have? Why don't you dive into, if you'd like to?
Okay, I saw that self-grasping and realizing self-grasping keeps the problem going, and realizing that everyone wants to be happy just as much as me helps me. That would help, because then it's everyone's on the same level, like everyone's just as important. That I could when there's emotion beyond, see that they're trying to just be happy.
Okay.
Or whatever the situation is.
Yeah. Yeah. So you came and went a little bit, Sue, at least on my end, but I think what I heard you say in particular was one way, as we kind of, with humility and pride, there's one way to be able to connect is, for you, it sounds like recognizing that everybody wants to be happy and doesn't want suffering, that there's a universal there, and that's a way to be able to connect. I mean, because it's universal, it's on the same level. So there's no sense of, in that one view, And that's a beautiful like way of, I mean, we use that as a really important ingredient in developing love and compassion, isn't it? Because at that level, there's
Yeah.
nobody wants happiness more or suffering less. It's all the same. So that really cuts through. Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Do you think if we have this kind of humble humility, this way of connecting, um, does it get in the way of achieving personal success?
This is
You mean
Julia.
if we don't have
Hi, Julia.
humility?
Hi, sorry. Um, I think it's the opposite, actually. I think in my own personal experiences, when I come from this self-cherishing kind of ego, like you were referring earlier to how the barrier goes up, and people tend to be less open and sometimes not hear you as well. They may just kind of tune out or turn off because of that sense of them not seeing that humility and that kind of people intrinsically kind of know that they're not as important as you because of the way that you present yourself or come across. Does that make sense?
I see. I think it does. It sounds like yeah, that there's a couple of things I hear is your sense that people, we can sense the degree to which there's an interest or humility or pride on the other hand, and that we tend to open towards those that we feel that are listening and connecting and relating in a humble way. So actually, in terms of being able to positively, to help and influence others, to be humble is actually, it sounds like your experience is that if we can tune into that quality, it helps others open up, so that we kind of open the door and take some of the barriers down so that we can connect. Whereas if we do it in a overinflated, prideful way, the very kind of that confidence, that kind of determination we've got to share our point of view, can cause others to put barriers up.
Yes, and it's also aggressive. It's like, and I've had this experience myself, having been a little strong-willed in my life, looking at my own issues that I've tried to let go of through working with my mind. And I've had some real personal experience with that, of how you can harm not only others, but yourself through not having that humility.
Yeah.
That was
Thank you
all I
very
was going to
much.
say. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I add something? This is Jillian.
That would be super, Gillian. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to kind of continue on with the points that were already being made. What I was thinking about during the meditation was vulnerability and a willingness to have kind of like an open curiosity towards others, and not just viewing it so much as my way or your way, but that everyone's opinion or their knowledge or wisdom is valuable. And I think if they have a sense, if other people around you have a sense that they are supported and it's a safe place for them to also be vulnerable, then you can both come up with new ideas, and pride, when pride's not an issue, it doesn't get in the way of people feeling safe and connected.
Yeah, very nice. It's almost like we can kind of create a different environment within the context of that relationship by introducing a quality of humility, that we kind of cook something up that's a bit different, a bit more tasty within the relationship.
Yes.
Yeah.
Combining those flavors, right?
Yeah. Thanks very much. That's
Thank
very
you.
interesting. How about, is there a role model perhaps that we have in our lives, perhaps in our family or community? Is that can that be a helpful tool, do you think, to bring to mind somebody that we can we can recognize, we can connect with those qualities in somebody else, and that helps perhaps elevate, helps us tune in a little bit.
Some of us have teachers and are practicing our own spiritual path, and the teachers that seem to have the most highest realizations are the ones that don't seem to have any self-cherishing aspect to their being at all. They're so humble and compassionate, only thinking of others' well-being. You know, we're lucky for those of us that have been had the opportunity to be around His Holiness the Dalai Lama or Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or some of the senior teachers like yourself, the experienced Sangha. But there's also beautiful people in our community around us, you know.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think we're fortunate to see kind of, you know, maybe leaders in different areas, or teachers that we have, that it seems, even though they have very deep qualities and experience and benefit beings, you know, others in many ways, seem to have a very kind of equally deep humility, and to connect. And I wonder also, in terms of you know, kind of day-to-day family, community, if there's people perhaps that we, or, you know, can bring to mind, or when we interact, we have that sense, we enjoy something that we enjoy about the experience with them, is now, you know, as we kind of thinking about it, is that there's a humility, there's a quiet confidence that is open and interested. There are folks like that in our lives that we can bring to mind. And I think with some of these questions, you know, they can be questions for now, and they can also be considerations to reflect on during the week, between our sessions. So I think, you know, to spend now a little bit of time looking at the other side of the coin, to this experience, you know, as we brought to mind, of not having humility, of when we can sense a sense of pride, or a kind of overinflated sense of ourselves. What was the experience like? What do we feel? What happens in our hearts, or in our bodies even?
Tenzin, this is Debbie.
Hi, Debbie.
Many years ago, I had an older gentleman. He came up to me and took my hand and very kindly looked me square in the eye and told me that it was what I learned after I knew it all that would really count. And I had no idea what he meant.
Yeah.
Many years later, I did. But I think sometimes that humor that those people pass on to us, that love, that I knew that this person cared about me, and I had no idea what he meant, but I never forgot what he said. And I know I was quite a prideful young lady at that time, so I think he definitely wanted to pass that on to me, but didn't know how. But that was kind of, because I remember those times, those horribly arrogant, you know, as a young person, of course, I knew everything, and I was grateful to him.
And how is those very wise words powerful at the time? And it sounds like they've kind of marinated over the years, settled into your experience. And I wonder what's shifted for you as you kind of, sounds like, taste or align with them.
I had other people like him that in my life who guided me gently and lovingly, and the times that I was either horribly arrogant or full of self-hatred. I would go between the two. And between those, they would help bring me into a middle ground of,
Mm.
of that I wasn't worse than and I wasn't better than. And I didn't need to be either one of those. That I could just be who and whatever I am at the moment, because that
Mm.
changes. But
Mm.
so that's kind of, I had many people who, I still have one lady who's in her 80s that's still very much a part of my life and guides me still to this day. She's that teacher that Julie mentioned. She's
Mm.
been very important in my life.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, well, thank you very much, Debbie. Thanks for sharing that. That sounds like some really, really important interactions that have kind of, again, kind of settled, developed, grown. Your heart's opened, and there's been a shift over the years. I think perhaps with pride and humility, I think there's a wonderful opportunity to have wise friends, good friends, maybe a teacher, but that just that recognition of someone who has the kind of ability in relationship with them to be able to, in a kind and gentle and wise way, be able to hold a mirror up sometimes and help us see where we're perhaps overinflated and perhaps times where we're kind of too hard on ourselves, and find that middle ground that you're talking about. I think that's particularly around pride. It can be very helpful to have good friends who are willing to help us explore that a bit. Yeah, thanks very much. I wonder how as we consider, it sounds like we've probably, many of us have had some experience of some effort or some changes, trying to change them to develop or evolve or grow in more humility, to connect with that state of mind. I wonder, as we how do we change to a mindset that has more humility?
This is Susan Tenzin. I think
Hi, Susan.
I think you have to.
maybe being quieter, or being a better listener, I guess.
Mm. Yeah, thank you, Susan. I think there's there's a lot to that, isn't there? Because then we ask, what does it mean to be a better listener? They're that genuine interest, isn't it? A presence. And I think based on the idea that there is something to learn, there's the possibility of something new that I don't yet know. Those are all kind of, in some ways, the narratives that help us be open and to listen well. To listen in order to hear rather than to respond. I think, sometimes to move out of when we look at kind of coming down from this more kind of elevated or inflated platform, recognizing that oftentimes that pride is coming from a place of fear or vulnerability, that we don't always get things right or we don't always know what to do. And I think kind of sometimes our assumption or belief in those narratives that I should know what to do or what to say can actually move us into a more kind of proud way of being. Whereas that vulnerability to be present to a lot of this is about recognizing the resistance and the scaffolding, the constructs, the preconceptions around my sense of who I am and how important I want to be or how perfectly I want to come across, and to essentially kind of let that dissolve so we can just be present and vulnerable and almost a kind of co-create in relationship, a kind of co-creation of working things out together rather than necessarily feeling like we should be right, correct, perfect. This assumption of some kind of way of being that is, again, and oftentimes quite a deeply set preconception. I think the other part, and I think it gets again to, I mean, I think, Susan, that just really, that gets straight to the heart of it, listening well, the sense that we're interconnected and dependent on each other. And that our happiness depends not only on terms of all the things that we, all the material experience, things that we have been, that we only enjoy based on the kindness of an incredible number of people. But I think also on a kind of practical and an emotional level, we depend on others for our support, for a relationship, for a sense of who we are in the world. So I think those are all considerations to help kind of change some of the narrative. And much of it is allowing ourselves to be imperfect and connecting with that, really allowing that, kind of recognizing that the kind of that imperfection, and allowing ourselves to explore with others. I thought also then, let's see, how are we doing? So, Sue, you mentioned the word nervous, and that brought to mind an idea of perhaps as we could imagine walking into a room full of people. And we have a choice, kind of recognizing we have, for some of us, there might be the choice that we make, we might start to feel a little bit anxious, a bit nervous, perhaps, wondering what's the right way of interacting? How should I behave? Who should I speak to? What should I do? Some uncertainty and some questioning. And a judgment, really. There's a judging of there's some right way of doing things, or a better way, or perhaps we're focusing on how we want others to perceive us.
Mm-hmm.
And we could describe this as a kind of here I am approach.
Mm-hmm.
As we walk in, we're very much focused on our own experience, our own sense of identity, and what others are going to think of us. So even as we're thinking of others, it's in relationship to I'm preoccupied with what they're thinking of me, and it's a very uncomfortable feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Tends to be, and I think it in order to, I think that one way that I was thinking pride what's the seed? How does it grow? I think is in relationship sometimes to that anxiety, that we then construct a more proud, kind of a shaky confidence, really. It can look confident,
Mm-hmm.
but it's based on a kind of nervous preoccupation with what others are thinking of me.
Mm-hmm.
And then we construct this kind of facade of confidence and engage, but it's not stable. Or we can take another approach, and to have that kind of flexibility, to be open, to be kind of soft, a loving presence, or I think a fairly simple kind of test is to have a genuine interest in the other people.
Mm-hmm.
A kind of what we could say is a "there you are" approach. So essentially, we let go of ourselves, and we pay attention to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And there, in that simple, not easy necessarily, but a simple shift from where's the attention on me and what others are thinking of me, to paying attention to the other person and their experience, and how not needing anything from anyone. How can I show up and have an interest and listen? Like Susan said, how can I listen? Well, how can I be fully present with whoever I'm in touch with? I think there we dissolve. We tend to kind of the nervousness tends to dissipate as soon as we make that shift. And within that space, then we can have a kind of more humble connecting and actually much more confident way of being. Well, I thought to perhaps now we could a kind of a similar idea with a guided reflection on humility. So again, similar to the guided meditation, I thought to lead a few ideas and questions for us to consider quietly. So again, just settling into our bodies and moving down into our heart experience. And bringing to mind, perhaps thinking of a time when someone was trying to speak with you, but you were occupied with something else. And really imagining it, really connecting with that experience. And did you continue with what you were doing? Observing your mind and connection to the person, being as honest and not judgmental. Just exploring what was the experience like, honestly. And when you listen to them, do you focus on what they're saying or feeling, what their experience might be? Or is your mind already forming a response based on your experiences? And now we imagine that experience again. And this time, we're going to stop what we're doing and make eye contact with them and listen carefully with an open mind, letting go of any preconceptions, being present and open. And observing your mind and your connection with the person. Noticing whether anything has changed in your experience. Rather than thinking about me, the focus is on them. How does your mind and your heart feel? Is it more open, less cluttered? And so there's also the invitation that during the next week, to notice and bring to mind seeing and feeling when we have more of these moments of connecting with humility. Okay. So I wonder if there's anyone that would like to share what arose for them during the reflection, during this reflection. Did anyone relate to the experience of having perhaps someone we would say we care about, and they're talking to us? It's obviously important to them, but we've got a different plan. We're already doing something, and we've kind of focusing on something else.
So, can you hear me?
Hi, Sue. Yeah.
So, I think sometimes, especially if you're around kids a lot, it's okay to say, well, not now because I'm in the middle of this.
Mm.
Or if someone is like, insisting, it's nice to stop. And it's mostly nice to stop. But sometimes I think it's okay to say, well, I can't do that right now. I can't go into this whole long discussion because I'm doing something else, but I'll catch you later or something. Otherwise, you know, so the other side is okay sometimes too, because otherwise people, especially kids, they'll take all the time and you won't. I haven't been around kids lately. So.
Yeah, maybe this is particularly relevant right now.
Of course, with kindness, to say it with kindness. Excuse me? Oh,
sorry, yeah, sorry, you're coming in and out a little bit.
Yeah, my connection is not so great.
Well, I think, so what I think I heard you say, it came in and out a little bit, was also how to, if we really are focused on something else, I mean, we are, and we're doing something, that there's a way that we can, in a kind of more kind, direct, honest, open way, we can say, actually, now's not the best time.
Yes.
And there's actually a kind of a more with humility and kindness, we can communicate clearly that we'd love to hear about it later.
Yes.
Yeah. That's maybe a great example right now, as we're spending maybe perhaps a little bit more time than usual with people that live in the same house as us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Any other ideas that anyone would like to share? Any other experiences?
Tom, can you hear me?
Hi, Tom. Yes.
One of my main problems is that I get distracted and on all levels, and just listening to somebody is just one thing. For example, I listen to somebody for a little bit, and then there comes a word, and I get distracted, and there's a whole sequence where I don't hear what he says, but on the outside, I seem like I'm listening. So I don't want to offend him. And then I realize that, and then I try to listen again. And so that happens all the time. So if I have a conversation and I really try to focus on listening, still I maybe get only 60% or so what he's saying.
And it sounds like in that example, Tom, I appreciate you sharing that it's not so much that you want to be thinking of something else, that you're kind of, so not so much from a kind of, sometimes the kind of pride of, why are you interrupting me? I'm in the middle of something, but more that it's, you find your mind kind of gets taken away, by your own thoughts, a word, something that the other person says, and you find yourself going off on tangents and having to bring your mind back.
Yes, and sometimes, and most of the time it works bringing it back, but I'm already missed quite a bit what the other person says. Full sequence, but I don't say that.
What do you think prevents you from sharing that experience with them?
Maybe I think that don't want to offend him. That I seem to listening really. I'm not really listening very good most of the time.
Yeah. And yet at the same time, there could be the opportunity to demonstrate how much it's important to you what they are saying, and your mind drifted and you weren't able to capture everything. Yeah. Well, I think that, as Susan also mentioned, I mean, there's such the act of listening is such a beautiful practice. It's a meditation practice in and of itself. Because our mind, as we find in meditation, our mind wanders, and the opportunity to bring our attention back. And I think, yeah, and to be in relationship within the context of a conversation. Tom, do you find as you practice mindfulness meditation, are you finding that that's helping you stay a bit more focused during the course of a conversation?
Yeah, I think every day is different, but it helps a lot.
Good.
And,
okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll keep going then. Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah. Are there anyone else would like to share any reflections from anything that we've talked about this evening?
Well, I see that Jen is writing some very interesting things. So
Okay. Okay, let's see. Jen.
But I want to tell you something important, you have to pay attention. She also wrote a very interesting thing. It feels tight, constricted.
Ah, yeah.
Oh, her house isn't quiet, so she can't.
So she's typing. Okay. Yeah. If you miss that time. So Jen was mentioning that with the kids, but if you miss the time, it seems like it slips away. The importance. So that I think that was relating maybe, Sue, to what you were saying in terms of there's times where we're focused on something, and there's someone, we have an idea about what to focus on, and someone and we're in relationship with like our attention. Yeah. Well, I think that there's maybe a combination between what Sue's saying and what Tom's saying and what Jen's saying, in terms of how do we respond in an open and honest and kind and loving way. And it might be, yes, I'll stop what I'm doing and pay attention to you. And it might be, what I'm doing is really important to me right now, and what you're saying is important, and I'd really like to listen to what you have to say, and I'm going to finish what I'm doing first. That could still be, an opportunity to communicate in a very loving, attentive way. And also, I think, as Tom mentioned, the opportunity, we all space out and go off on different adventures with our thoughts when we're listening to others speaking. And sometimes, even though we don't want to give the impression that we've spaced out or we're distracted, the kind of reality is we're all doing that. That happens. And so perhaps there's an opportunity to even kind of connect even more, to say, what you're saying is really important to me, and I missed a bit there. Could you repeat it? And that perhaps, even though we don't say that for fear that would look unfriendly, but I wonder if there's a way that we can do it. It's have to be quite vulnerable, but actually what we're saying is, you're really important to me, and what you're saying is really important, and my mind works like a human mind, and it jumps around, and I miss something. Well, I thought to, as we're coming to the last few minutes, to go perhaps a little bit, we mentioned how humility, with all of these guidelines, is an opportunity to explore these different themes, these different guidelines, and to help us to kind of as we consider them, reflect on them, kind of perhaps, dive into them a little bit more in our experience, perhaps during the week, that we can further develop our understanding, our ability to engage compassionately, and also our ability to, our interest to deepen our wisdom. And I just thought to in terms of kind of going deeper, using the guideline to go deeper in compassion and wisdom, because each of the guidelines relates to both. I mean, when we think of compassion in terms of a sense of, loving kindness or compassion, feeling a sense of connection with others or closeness. So there's humility as a way of, we can recognize what is it that's preventing me from feeling close and connected, is often a sense of pride, of separateness. I'm better than, I know more than, my knowledge is complete without what you're saying. Some message like that. So kind of spotting the pride, shifting into humility allows us to be more connected, feel closer. And then also to connect and feel closer with a sense of empathy. Like not only do I feel connected to you, but I care about your experience. I care and I can sense, I'm interested in what you're feeling and your suffering, your difficulties. So that ability to empathize, we can go deeper into that if we can navigate this kind of pride on one hand and humility on the other, to move into that empathic connection. And then with that closeness, the empathy, and then we generate a wish to help. That I care, I see your suffering, I care that you're suffering, and I want to help. And maybe even there's an opportunity to engage in some action that can reduce their suffering. And I think when we look at that as a way of engaging, one of the main barriers for that to happen is a pride of some sort, is a sense of separation. And so humility really helps us kind of dissolve that barrier. And there is the door into compassion. So in some ways, it's almost like a kind of oil that lubricates each of those steps, the helping behavior, that we help with less expectation for reward. As I think someone mentioned early on in the discussion, I think it was Julia, that when there's a genuine humility, that it feels good for the other person. They can sense it and they open. So it feels good to the other person, and there's more benefit in our experience. We're able to connect, we're able to influence, we're able to help. And we also have looked at that kind of nervous, shaky self-preoccupation that can happen. And humility allows us to dissolve that. So there's a self-compassionate element to it too. And so then when we look at from a wisdom point of view, what do we mean by wisdom? It's easy to say, right? But I think understanding the nature, the experience of oneself, of others, of the world around us, tuning into the way things are, not the way, remember, my filter maybe projects on. The way I want things to be is often what I'm relating with. I'm relating with the world as I want it to be, and then I get upset when it turns out it's different than what's actually there. The wisdom seeks to go through and explore the kind of let's get to the nuts and bolts, let's zoom in. And we see that things are impermanent at one level, that they're constantly changing. And so when I relate to the world in a way that sees permanence, which is what I'm often doing, I suffer. I bump up against that experience because it's not true. And so connecting the wisdom of impermanence, and at another level, that everything is depending on parts. Everything is dependent on other causes and conditions. So that we can't find anything that exists in a solid, findable, inherent way that's truly there. Everything. We've talked about this in terms of, kind of microscope, powerful microscope in the table is solid and it looks like it's really there, but only at one level. The more that we look, we can't find it. We can't actually identify anything that's really table. So that's a much more subtle level of wisdom that can be challenging, and not just a philosophical kind of nuance, but if we think about how that relates to oneself and others, that as much as I think that there's an I that I really need to pay attention to as I walk into the room and I'm thinking, what about me? And what are they thinking about me? There's a me-ness. There's an I that seems very solid and so important that I'm like, that's all I'm paying attention to. So if we do that same zooming in to the I that is causing me anxiety as I'm thinking about like what other people are thinking of it, I can't find it in the way that I think it exists. And that's actually an incredibly liberating experience. That's the sense of being able to kind of dissolve the ego, to move beyond that. And within that space, then there's the kind of the natural expression of that space is one of love and compassion. There is the solid I and the solid other doesn't exist the way that I think it does, the way that I'm relating to it. So we see that humility is a quality that's permeated by openness and curiosity and a sense of not knowing everything. I think that's a key. How do we shift into humility? Is one step that we use in a meditation tradition is even bringing to mind things that I know that I don't know, in order to kind of just kind of almost like cold water on the face of actually as proud as I think I know this or that, but there's so many things I don't know, in a way to open the mind up. And that the deeper we go in our exploration and investigation of the self, that the quality of humility enables us to go beyond the preconceptions. So it's kind of learning or growing that's possible because, as Debbie mentioned, the kind of very wise words of advice that was given, that as long as I think I know, then there's not a lot of space to learn, to grow. And what a shame that is, because there's so much kind of worldly knowledge to discover. But then if we think of these concepts about when we talk about wisdom in a meditation tradition, like the way that I think the self exists is almost always exaggerated. And because of that, I then relate to others in ways that causes me and others to suffer. So that knowing that I don't know would be really, really helpful. That the humility of knowing that I haven't got it as much as I think I have. So these preconceptions are deeply ingrained, right? They fuel our habitual tendencies. But humility, I think, gives us that doorway in to be able to dissolve some of these preconceptions. I thought the meditation tradition also speaks of, it likes to kind of list out different qualities, slightly different flavors of things. And it actually kind of speaks about 7 different types of pride, which is quite interesting. And I thought to mention one in particular, because it describes it as a kind of self-effacing pride. So it's a kind of putting oneself down, which we might not think of as pride.
It is.
But it is, and it's that sense of, because to think that I'm not worthy, I'm holding on to a very solid sense of I. I'm still grasping at a very strong, fixed concept about myself. To then be so judgmental and so negative about it. And yet, if we turn to a good friend, they'll tell us we're talking nonsense. They might not put it like that, but they can recognize the exaggeration and the extrapolation, the way that we're judging in a very negative and exaggerated way. But so I just thought it's interesting in terms of as we go a bit deeper into each of these guidelines each week, with the kind of pride that even just to hold on to a strong concept about something and believe it's true in a very fixed way. That there's a kind of closed grasping, and that goes against all the descriptions that we've been just talking about in terms of relating to ourselves and others, of this openness, this expansiveness, this being able to learn. So I think humility really encourages us to approach these concepts with a gentle and kind and a firm sense of curiosity and investigation. And I think, perhaps even helping us ask the question of what lies behind this concept. What can I learn if I let go of this even slightly? So I hope that there's been some interesting ideas to, I appreciate very much the discussion that we've been able to have today. And hopefully there's some ideas to perhaps continue to consider during the week. I wondered, just as we're finishing off, if there's any other questions or comments for the group before we close out.
Tenzin, I have a question. This is Julia. A couple of my friends were trying to get on tonight that weren't successful, Pamela and Jeannie, and I'm going to try to help with the phone connection and stuff. But can you tell us how to access the recording of tonight's class?
Thank you, Julia. That's a great question. So what we're hoping, because we haven't recorded one before, is that it will be a link that we can put on the website where the audio recordings are. Because we haven't recorded one of these Zoom meetings before, we're not 100% sure what format it's going to result in. So I think probably the safest thing to do is we're going to do our best, and when we discover the destination, maybe we can send an email out to people.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks for mentioning that. Yeah, it's all a bit of this is the first test run for recording the video, so we'll see what we'll see, and we'll get it posted somewhere, and then let folks know. Yeah. Well, maybe we could just for a moment, just as we also kind of opened with a motivation to focus our minds, maybe we can just also bring to mind that we've had the opportunity to settle our minds in meditation, to introduce some ideas and discuss them, to listen to each other and to share, to reflect, and perhaps note ideas that we would like to think about, continue to reflect on for the week ahead. And so with the positive energy that we've created from these from these meditations and discussions, putting our minds with effort into how we can develop compassion and wisdom, humility, these positive qualities for ourselves and others. Perhaps we can bring to mind that how wonderful it would be if that anyone that connects with us in any way, that we can be of the greatest of benefit to anyone that we talk to, that we listen to, that even people that just think about us or connect with us in any way, that we can relate to them in a loving, helpful, humble way, continue to develop wisdom and compassion, and to respond to others and the world around us with a compassionate and wise heart and mind. Okay.
Tenzin.
Well, thank you all very much for joining. And we'll be here again, hopefully. We plan to be next week at the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you.